How's it going?
Awesome.
Are you all missing class?
Yes.
I wasn't sure if somebody kicked a professor out of here or something. Well, thank you for missing class. I'll write you all a note. So I'm just curious, how many of you have actually volunteered with the president's campaign before? And then the rest of you you're just here? You're new? Is this a really tough room? Man. Well, all right. Thank you for having me. I'm just gonna talk very quickly about why the guy from House and Harold Kumar is here to talk about. Acknowledge that right off the bat, and then answer any questions you guys have about the campaign. So I'm not a very political person generally. I registered as an independent when I turned 18 and registered to vote. And I voted for Democrats and Republicans and weird third-party candidates, depending on what the election was. But I started volunteering for the president in 2007. I had a bunch of friends who were overseas in Iraq. I had buddies who couldn't afford college. I had one friend in particular who I talk about a lot, who was in community college and had to decide one semester if he was going to get eyeglasses to see the board or buy his textbooks. Couldn't afford both because he didn't have enough financial aid and didn't have health insurance. So all these things sort of started adding up, and I thought, all right, I lucked out in the sense that I was able to pay off loans and take care of things probably about 5 or 6 years after I graduated, because I ended up working in film. But most of my friends were not in the same situation, and it bothered me that whether we had a Democrat or a Republican in the White House before, neither party really seemed to take seriously issues that impact young people. And if they did, then friends of mine wouldn't be stuck in these crazy situations. So I figured I would volunteer. I signed a supporter card, which is actually similar to these volunteer shift sheets. And this was in early 2007, before the Iowa caucus. So Iowa was the first state to have their version of the primary. It's a caucus system, and I said I'll knock on doors and help make phone calls, and figured I'd go to Iowa for about 3 days. And I got to Des Moines and was really inspired by, there was an underdog president. He had a very different background than other candidates running. He was a community organizer. He wasn't taking federal lobbyist money in his campaign. He was against the Iraq War, all this stuff that I saw there, but mostly saw all these great young organizers that were working really tirelessly, and I thought, this is awesome. I kind of want to stay and help out. So I ended up staying for about 3 months in Des Moines. Got to know the president really well, his campaign staff, and I guess the other reason I was able to stay was there was a writer's strike in Hollywood. So there were no fake doctor shows for me to do that year. But after the president won the Iowa caucuses, I took a little more active role on his arts policy committee and working on youth outreach in particular. I was teaching a class in Philly at the time at UPenn, and so I was juggling, that with some of the youth policy stuff I was doing, and basically went to 25 other states for the president between then and the time that he won. After he won, I basically was talking to some folks about how to continue helping. Decided I would apply for a job at the White House. Ended up getting the job at the White House, which was to work as the president's liaison to young Americans. So I worked on the outreach team, and took a 2-year sabbatical from my acting world, and decided to move to DC. And that was when I really had the chance to see what the president was like behind the scenes. So all the stuff on TV, I mean, yes, he's a very funny guy. He's incredibly smart. He doesn't really yell. But he's very well aware of everything that's going on. But I think behind the scenes was when I really saw how hard he was fighting, particularly for things that impacted young people. So everything from the Iraq War, wrapping that up, repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, doubling funding for Pell Grants, and increasing funding for research institutions, incentivizing the job market, things like lending and freeing up capital from the Small Business Administration so that young people that are graduating can take out loans to start their small businesses if they can't get a guarantor elsewhere. There's this whole long laundry list of things that he worked on and fought for really hard. Wasn't particularly, they're not like sexy enough things to end up on TV, which was really frustrating because those were the things that I was working on. So I remember, fighting for doubling the Pell Grant when the president reformed financial aid right around the time of healthcare, or better yet, he was meeting with his jobs council. I like telling this story. He was meeting with his jobs council in North Carolina, and I think the same week. So that jobs council meeting, obviously talking about how to continue to grow the economy. I think we had positive job growth that month. Now we've had 31 months of positive job growth, but the point was that things were moving in the right direction, and we wanted to let people know about it and continue that propulsion. And I guess the president did an interview with one of the big networks that morning or that evening, and there was a fly buzzing around the room. You guys might have seen this video. He like, caught it and swatted the fly. So for the next 9 days, the media's top story was Obama ninja swats fly, which I thought was kind of awesome the first time I saw it. And then like at day 3, I think a lot of us were thinking like, all right, he also just like saved a bunch of financial aid stuff and had positive job growth. Can we just talk about that a little bit too, instead of the Obama fly thing? But I think that was as somebody who'd never worked in politics before, that was the first eye-opener into realizing that, okay, particularly on youth issues, there aren't a lot of things that the media is necessarily going to talk about. And maybe that's okay, most of us don't watch Fox or CNN or MSNBC regularly enough anyway. But seeing the president fight very regularly over the course of 2 years was really, really inspirational. I ended my 2-year stint at the White House about a year ago, ended up moving back to LA, and then decided to sign up to volunteer again for the president's campaign, which is why I'm back out here now, so not being paid to do any of this. And just decided, I didn't want to see the progress that we've made get rolled back, and I had the chance to meet a lot of people that were affected by all that. Now it's probably been about 6.5 weeks, maybe 7 weeks since my buddy Kevin, who enlisted in the Marines, graduated from Marine Corps training in San Diego, got to bring his boyfriend with him to watch him graduate because Don't Ask, Don't Tell got repealed, so that's not something he would have been able to do under the previous president or under someone like Governor Romney. Having met a lot of people we were just talking about at our last event, there's a young woman I met in Colorado who I think put a face to, like, you read about healthcare policy and it seems really dry, and there's this woman who came to an event like this and people were saying why they showed up. She's 19, she said she'd never done anything in politics before, but she's had to be on the pill since she was 13 because she has a chronic medical condition, so she can't get out of bed if she wasn't on the pill. And she paid attention a little bit to healthcare reform because as of that month, I think there's now no copay for a lot of women's health, so mammograms, cancer screenings, and things like the pill. And then she was also outraged that someone like Governor Romney and some other folks wanted to roll back healthcare reform. So if he was inaugurated, then she wouldn't have access to these medicines that she needs. And then she also said something I didn't even think about, where she goes, all this stuff about women's issues, I turn on the TV or I turn on the radio and I hear people say that young girls who are on the pill must somehow miraculously be sluts who just want to sleep around. She said that was like the last straw for me. And I said, this is ridiculous. We should have civility and we should be able to talk about real issues and rationality and what a medical condition is and why young people need certain medications. And she just thought that the president was elevating that conversation and wanting to have that conversation. So she goes, I've got 6 months till the election and I want to make sure that I can still get the medicine that I need. I'm like, all right, I'm going to stop talking because she obviously needs to tell a lot more of these stories. But those were the types of folks who we had the chance to meet when I was working at the White House and then when I was volunteering again for the campaign. And I think that's the big driver that's inspired me. And now here we are 2 weeks before the next election, which is why we're holding events like this to just make a really straightforward ask of you guys. Is that there are a lot of youth policy things that I think we've made a lot of progress on, everything from equality to jobs to environment. But there's a whole lot more that I think still needs to be done. I think there was a clear choice between what Mr. Ryan and Governor Romney's plans are. It does involve repealing a lot of the progress that I think we've made under the president. And the ones that I think can help preserve that are you guys. So no matter all the nonsense you see on TV or any of the very ranty Facebook posts that I think a lot of our friends like to put up to either piss us off or maybe you guys are guilty of the same thing. But none of that is actually going to make a difference unless people get out there and vote. And the one thing statistically that has always meant the difference in voter turnout is not the ads, it's not how much money is spent, it's door knocking and it's face-to-face voter contact. So having the opportunity to reach out to 10 or 20 people on your dorm floor, in your fraternity house, or in your apartment building, or if you don't want to talk to people you know or want to help us make phone calls, this is the relatively easy part, frankly. We've already registered people to vote, but a lot of people still think that they need their photo ID to vote, and that may deter them from coming out. We want your help in educating them that they can actually come out and exercise their vote. That kind of neighbor-to-neighbor voter contact is the thing that drives people coming out to vote more than anything else. The president can't win without that, but from the size of the fact that you guys are all in this room cutting class, to hear me give a political speech, I'm feeling very good. I'm feeling very like it's a little promising. So I want to ask of you before you guys leave today is to please sign up for at least one shift. If you've got more time than one shift, please give us that more time. There are a lot of us. I'd be happy to talk to you about what it's like being on the road for the next 14 days. So if you want to take 14 days off school, that's fine too. Come with me. But if not, any 4-hour shift, we would really love your help, and it'll really make I know a big difference to folks like my buddy Kevin and the woman that I met in Colorado, who are really relying on all of us to kind of give them a hand in re-electing the president. So I didn't want to talk at you too much. That's all I really wanted to say, but if folks have questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, come sign up for a shift, and thank you for having me. Yeah.
Anybody have questions?
Nobody wants to go first. Yes. And tell me your name, what you're majoring in. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm Sid. My major is electrical and computer engineering. Pretty standard here. My question is that when you're coming out here to give these speeches, I feel like, and I may be completely wrong, but a lot of the people here are already planning on voting for Obama, whether or not they would end up actually going or taking the time to. And the other half, or other percentage, is probably here just to see you speak. But how do you think that giving these speeches or coming here is going to sway the vote from the people who aren't already planning on voting for it?
So I think that's the big reason why we're here, right? There's a component to it that personally I'm inspired by the president. I had the chance to work for him. I think he's doing the right thing, and I want to share those stories. The other component of it is hoping that people will join us in that endeavor. Nowadays, it's not just good enough, particularly in a battleground state like Pennsylvania, where it could swing either way, and the president can't win the election without Pennsylvania. But we believe that he can win with the support of young people. So that's very critical, right? He's polling very well amongst young voters, but that doesn't mean anything, as you said. Somebody might in theory say they support the president, but if they're not actually voting, or better yet, if they're so passionate about the president that I have friends like this who rant about Mitt Romney on my Facebook wall. And all I do is respond with a link to barackobama.com/volunteer. Like, your ranting doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is if you actually come out, even for the 20 minutes it took you to make that really substantial rant, you could have helped us make 10 phone calls, and that would have made a much bigger impact. So I think those are the things that we're trying to convey, that it's not just, it's not just something you might read about in the paper. It's very real. I feel like we sometimes underestimate the power of how much that one voice or that 1 hour of volunteering makes a difference, and it does make a critical difference. And you're also talking about a president who really has won the offices he's held because of that community organizing. So he's not a guy who, President and First Lady paid off their student loans in 2004. So this is not a man that has come from tremendous wealth and that sort of upbringing. His upbringing is more similar to sort of my parents or me growing up in New Jersey and sort of, I lucked out paying off my student loans because of my industry I went into. But so I think that's what we're getting at, is that we can't really do it without your help. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a psych major. I was wondering, you mentioned Obama and all the things he's done for people around our age and young people. Would you say that's the major reason why he's by a landslide so much more popular among college students than say above older demographics?
I think there's an element of that, right? I think if you look at so top 5 issues, or 5 of the top issues rather, for young progressives in 2008 were jobs in the economy, access to education, poverty, climate change, and Darfur. 5 of the top issues for young evangelical conservative Republicans in 2008 were jobs in the economy, access to education, poverty, climate change, and Darfur. Those are 5 things the president worked on very hard, 5 things that we've seen a lot of achievement on. I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing that. Yeah, there's a little bit of a generation gap, right? If you're a young Republican or a young Democrat, chances are you probably believe in marriage equality. That's not something that our older friends necessarily believe in, but it's something that, we've got a president that believes in it. We've got a lot of young people who 20 years from now, when we're having kids that are in middle school or high school or discovering themselves, we want them to have better lives too. So I think that sort of forward-thinking policy, it's a big difference between what President Obama's done and what Governor Romney's proposing. So I do think that that's part of it, but I also think that that's what we're getting at, that the stakes are very high here. That all of that stuff could, it could get repealed, which is why we're.
A lot of it will affect us, like you're talking about with, healthcare is, a lot of us are going to be in debt when we graduate and won't really be able to afford a lot with regards to insurance or our own healthcare. And things that happen, like this story you mentioned about the rower, and that would just leave us in a bad position. So that's probably something to do with it.
Yeah, I would agree. What do we sort of want the next, not just 4 years, but the next 10, 20 years to look like? I'll give you a quick example, and I'll get to your question. There's a particularly computer engineering, a lot of this stuff is really big, particularly on CMU, right? After inauguration, the president met with Steve Jobs and a bunch of the folks at Apple, and he said, what do I have to do to get you guys to produce iPods and iPads in the United States? Is it the cost of labor? Is it the environmental regulations? Are these things so prohibitive that you can't manufacture this technology here? And they said, you know, among those reasons, actually, the biggest reason is that in the United States, we don't have enough mid-level engineers who need to be on site in a lot of these manufacturing plants, or we need to be here domestically to get this stuff done. That's why we can't produce iPods and iPads in America. So then you see the president invest, you know, $3.4 billion in STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. Not because it's ever going to pay political dividends for his re-election, but 10 years from now or 15 years from now, it's not only going to help, you know, our long-term economic growth, but it's going to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. So and that's not something I've ever heard from, you know, our friends on the right, or even from the media, right? It's not a particularly sexy story, and it requires a certain calculation and forethought about what the next 10, 15, 20 years are going to look like. So that's sort of what I was talking
Right,
about.
that'll affect our lives more than people, say, 30 or 40 years older than us.
I agree, exactly. Where was the, yeah, okay.
I'm Alexandra, computer science major. I was actually going to ask about funding for STEM education and things like that. You kind of like answered, you said that you got $3.4 billion. What sort of things did that go towards? Did that go towards like high school education? Did that go towards college education? Does that stuff, does the money they're putting in, does that actually like, has it been producing like positive like effects, like people actually going towards programs? Because you see a lot of educational programs that actually end up failing.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the money, my understanding is, and you should look at it because since I left the White House, I know that program's also changed and grown quite a bit. Part of it is that, part of it's also competitive grant making. So if it's going to schools or if it's going to programs, it's going into buckets so that the pilot programs that have actually produced results are more likely to get some of that funding than the ones that haven't. And that's sort of across the board on a lot of the education buckets. They're not just throwing money at it and hoping that, you know.
Is it like high schools or is it colleges?
It's both. And there's also a huge public-private partnership component to it. So you've got, you know, you've got big companies that are equally invested in making something like that work. And then incidentally, there are a bunch of immigration reform advocates that are also focusing on that because there's a portion of comprehensive immigration reform. This is sort of on the tail end of STEM, but it has to do with the funding also, where right now we're, I know this is a big issue at CMU too. We've got folks who come here from abroad, right? They're getting some of the best education in the world. They're getting doctorates, and then they're going back to their countries of origin, particularly India, China, or Brazil, and then they're competing against us. So if we just let them stay here with these fancy degrees, they're actually going to create more jobs for Americans and pay taxes and sort of send the money that, you know, we've sort of already invested in things like STEM back into the system. So it's a very broad overview of it. But there's a huge website on, it's linked to the White House, whitehouse.gov/OSTP, which is the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And they've got a whole rundown of in the weeds about it. Yeah.
I'm Ben, I'm a policy and management major. I just had the question, how do you talk to the young students or college students who feel very disillusioned about like the Democrats and President Obama? Because in 2008, it seems like a lot was promised and President Obama has delivered. It just feels like there's more to be done, I guess, and that doesn't seem to be happening. So how do you talk to students like that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is more to be done. I think that's why he's making the case for a second term, right? That, you know, achieving somewhere between 50 to 60% of what you promised when you were running the first time is a pretty significant victory, which is why you want the second term. I think one of the things that I learned that I wasn't as savvy about was how Congress works. So it's something like less than 13% of people under 30 know what a Senate filibuster is, or know that you need 60 votes from the Senate in order to get a bill passed. There are certain things the president can do with executive power, and there are other things that he can't do, right? So something like don't ask, don't tell repeal, I'll just give you that because it pulls so well with young people. For us, it's a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, my buddy wants to enlist in the military and still call his boyfriend from overseas, and shouldn't he be allowed to do that because he's going to take a bullet for our freedom? Who doesn't believe that that's the right thing to do? Well, older senators, the average age of the Senate is 63. And so when you saw how long Don't Ask, Don't Tell took to get done, I think a lot of people were thinking, why is it taking so long? This is a no-brainer. Obama promised it would get done. The reality was he was fighting every day for it behind the scenes in the White House in his capacity, but needed members of Congress to act on it for it to actually get done. And that's the case with a lot of things. So one of the things, I'm glad you brought that up, one of the things that we've been trying to do is talk about that broader spectrum of why is it important to vote in local elections? Why is it important to vote in, you know, your statewide office? This is the first and probably only politician who I'll actually go to bat for like this. I've got to know him very well. I know his character. But even for other folks, I mean, I'm obviously going to vote in my local races and my Senate races. I don't agree with 100% of what anybody stands for, but the reality is one of two people in each of these elections is going to be the person that makes those decisions. And so you've got to sort of take the time to look at it and say, well, what's this person going to do for the next 4 years? Yeah.
I'm Hannah. I'm a creative and professional writing major. I feel like both of the presidential candidates talk a lot about creating manufacturing jobs and how college students are underemployed. And my mom's been out of work for 1.5 years. My dad's been through like 7 jobs since I've been a junior in high school. And like, how is Obama going to create higher level jobs that aren't just in manufacturing?
It's a good question. What industries are there?
My mom is in the food industry. My dad works in construction and fire safety.
So fire safety in particular, I don't know if the president signed an executive order that funded a lot of the fire and police forces that had been cut by local and regional governments, so that's sort of a big one. In that realm, it's a little more complicated because there's city, state, or federal employees, right? So it's not a private sector venture. But for the other private sector ventures, it's things like, I mean, there are still industries that get huge rewards for going overseas. The oil and gas industry still gets, a bazillion, I don't know the actual statistics, I'm saying it's a bazillion dollars in tax subsidies, right? But that hasn't necessarily helped us. So the question is giving those same tax subsidies to things like wind or solar, or industries that actually need it, that can continue to grow the economy in a smart way, particularly where in a lot of these, if you're talking about industries that are outsourcing, where we're losing jobs to other countries, how do we slow that, particularly if they're American companies, how do we hold them accountable? But then if there are other service-related industries, things like this again goes back to young people, but there's an older component of it with teachers, making sure that we're continuing to fund teachers, that there's a mechanism to fund particularly good teachers, focus on teacher retention. When city and state governments fire teachers, what can we actually do to bring them back? And a lot of that goes to your question about STEM, where it's not just dealing with, well, let's have government throw money at the problem. It was looking at how can the private sector kind of partner with those folks. There's a whole jobs plan that I wish was getting more attention. I'm more tuned to the youth part of it, since that's what I had worked on. But if you go to either BarackObama.com or WhiteHouse.gov, they'll both give you the same type of information. The BarackObama.com thing is obviously a campaign website, but if you want the policy stuff, it's just WhiteHouse.gov, and there's a jobs tab, and it'll have everything divided between what was legislative that we still are fighting with Congress to get done, what is within executive jurisdiction that the president's already done, and then what's the second term agenda. There's this myth out there that he hasn't proposed a second term agenda, which really bugs me because it's been out there for the last 1.5 years. It's just that no one's paid attention to it. So definitely check that stuff out too, because it's pretty substantive.
We got time for like 1 or 2 more questions.
All right. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Peter Masters. I'm International Relations Environmental Policy. Where do you personally disagree with Obama?
Where do I personally disagree with him?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know that it's prudent to answer that 2 weeks before an election. I'll say this: I think that there are things that I'll give you a good example actually. Arts funding, right? I'm a product of a public arts high school in New Jersey. It's one of the few remaining ones in the country. One of the first programs that always gets cut are the arts in this country. And it's one of the things that, because of the fiscal situation, it's something that we did roll back a little bit on in terms of the National Endowment for the Arts funding. That was sad to see, but I quickly realized when I looked at the president's numbers and how there was a dip of, I think, 10% in the National Endowment for the Arts budget. You looked at that point, actually, as a congressman, you looked at Mr. Ryan's budget, and there was a 0 next to the National Endowment for the Arts. So that was a big wake-up call in terms of when there is a fiscal crisis, what are the cuts you have to make and how do you tighten your belt. Now, if I were the president, I probably wouldn't have cut the arts. I know that the president supports the arts quite a bit, but I also know that that was probably a really tough decision for him. One that, I was a little bummed out about, but one which I think he says it best, where he's like, don't judge me against the ideal, judge me against the practical. What are the choices that we have to make, and how do you actually make those decisions? So something like arts funding is probably a good one. Yeah, sorry, we'll just get to him, and then are we? When are we at here? 4 o'clock?
Yeah, give or take.
Okay, so we can do a couple more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or are you pulling me?
Actually, no. I gotta figure out. I think our next one's at 4:15.
Okay.
But I think we have to leave before.
Okay, let me know. I gotta listen to that. I'm just like my.
No, we're leaving here at 4:15. So yeah, we got time for a couple more
Okay.
questions.
All right. Yes.
John, physics major. Talk a lot about, and you don't even need to say it, it's pretty obvious that Obama is really concerned with all like the issues of the youth and what the youth really wants. And basically, why, keeping in mind that the president has pretty much exclusively this power. And it's such an issue that all the youth are really talking about. Like, is Obama going to change the scheduling of weed or not? Like, I'm just so confused. I'm so confused. I really am by his policy. He came into office like talking about it, and then did not really do anything about it for 4 years, or even was against it. And
This is a misnomer. He is not. He's always been against legalization of marijuana. He continues to be against legalization of marijuana.
that's what I thought.
Yeah, no. If that's your issue, you should vote accordingly because he's not going to legalize it.
No, that's what I thought. I was
Yeah.
just a little bit confused.
No, we should be upfront about it, and I feel like I get the brunt of that question for obvious reasons, right? Like, no, he's not for legalization, and he's not gonna. The one thing that he has talked about that he has done very consistently is since there are relatively limited federal resources, we should be going after violent offenders, not non-violent offenders, which a lot of petty drug crimes fall under the non-violent offender category. There's been some attention paid to that in places like California, where federal agents have raided clinics that folks can go to if they have a prescription. The reason for that, if you actually look at which clinics they raided, are because they're either selling to minors, they're selling without prescriptions, or they're selling other drugs at the backs of these places. But no, he's been pretty consistent. Yes.
My name is Kal Penn. I'm a neuroscience major. Climate change has really gone in the back burner during this election campaign, and that issue will affect the youth much more than the older generations. What is Obama planning to do about climate change, and is he planning on putting it back in the agenda if he is reelected?
Yeah, it's still in the agenda. That's one of those issues that you need congressional approval on. I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's also one of those issues that you have the candidate that wants to continue to move forward with climate change legislation, and then the opponent that doesn't believe in the science itself, which is a really jarring thing if you kind of contrast those two statements. So I think that's one of those things when we talk about what the stakes are. In terms of what he's done, this is again your classic example of executive power versus what you need congressional approval for. So things like doubling fuel efficiency standards. So by 2025, we're going to have the cleanest fuel efficiency standards we've ever had. That's historic. The president has jurisdiction over the federal fleet. So all of the vehicles, airplanes, cars, trucks that the federal government owns all have to be revamped by a certain time. So all of those things he's done. The one example I'll practically give you about how complex it is that shortly after I started at the White House, the president asked us to put together a meeting with young environmental stakeholders. So we had about 160 people that came to the White House, and the idea behind that was we wanted to share with them what the president's climate change plan was, ask them basically for their litmus test, and also what they're hearing about it. So separation of powers, I'll be quick about this. Separation of powers, the executive branch can't ever tell, if I was here on behalf of the White House, I could never tell you guys to call members of Congress about a particular bill. It's illegal. So we would never do that, and we weren't allowed to do that. What we could do, however, was try and get a taste of what people were doing in their own communities and explain what the president was doing, with the hopes that they would go out there and make their voice heard in the right way. So we had about half of the 160 were from young progressive environmental groups. The other half were from young evangelical groups, actually, whose view is different from the science, but their belief is we're put here on God's green earth, so we should take care of it, right? So these are two groups of people that would never vote for the same person, or never agree on probably 90% of issues, but that was one issue they agreed on. They came in, we had this summit, we talked about everything the president was going to do, and I noticed that outside, while we were having the meeting, there were about 50 people who were protesting the meeting, and they were in the t-shirts of one of the organizations who was in the meeting. The executive director was in the meeting. And I pulled her aside just out of curiosity. I was like, look, I'm obviously not going to tell you what you should or shouldn't do with your First Amendment rights here, but I'm just curious why you brought 50 amazing, energetic people to protest this meeting. She goes, well, we just wanted to make our voice heard. I'm like, when you get invited to a meeting at the White House, your voice is heard. Like, you're inside the building, you're having this high-level meeting. And I realized at that moment that we had not done as good of a job explaining to advocates about what exactly they could do to partner with us to move the needle along, to actually see that change come across. And the president had a chance as a follow-up to meet with her and a few of the other advocates, and he just said sort of point blank, he's had this proposal for climate change, he sent it to the Hill, the members of Congress just haven't acted on it. And up until that meeting, and I assume the same is true now, although I haven't checked on that since I don't work there anymore, but up until that date, he said the president has received 0 phone calls from members of Congress of either party saying, Mr. President, we support your environmental legislation. And he needs 60 votes in the Senate to get something like that done. So now that I'm out of the White House, I can tell you the problem there is absolutely with Congress. I would imagine if the president's got plans that they're not quite comfortable with, maybe he'll get 40%, maybe he'll get 60% of what he's proposed. But that's also in itself a huge victory. You're never going to get 100% of what you want in a political climate. Thankfully, we don't have a dictatorship and there's no magic wand, and so there's always a little bit of give and take. But in a nutshell, I think that's why it's still on the agenda. It's never been taken off, and that's why he wants to continue pushing. I think the reason you probably don't hear about it too much now is it's pretty clear. Like you've got candidates that don't believe in the science itself, and you've got the president who's got a pretty specific plan about it. And I think that's why there's like nothing to talk about in the middle. It's not like they disagree on the degrees to it. They just somebody thinks global warming doesn't exist, and the other person has a plan for it. Yes.
Hi, I'm Samia. I'm a psychology major. One of Obama's big promises in the 08 was closing Guantanamo.
Yep.
I just wondered, why is that not happening?
Because no state is willing to take the prisoners. So there's a bill that was voted down that we proposed, and I think it was the House, if I'm not mistaken, that rejected. They put a clause in the bill. Basically, the clause was to close Guantanamo, and they did it. If I'm remembering this correctly, they did it craftily in a way where, yeah, we want to close Guantanamo, and we're prohibiting you from using any federal funds to transfer detainees. Which means we're saying shame on you for not closing it, and also not giving you any money to close it, so that we can look good and you can look stupid. Which is not an answer, right? So the president hasn't abandoned this, but what that meant was, since now there's a standing regulation that says you can't use federal funds to transfer detainees, you're seeing detainee transfers back to countries of origin or back to third countries. So there's the big transfer back to the UK, right, of British nationals. I think you'll continue to see that, but it's a very complicated issue about what we're actually going to do with a lot of these other prisoners when we can't be the ones to pay for them in their countries of origin, like in the case of the Uyghurs. You can't really send them back to China, right? So what are you going to do with these people who are otherwise stateless? It's still on the agenda. It's a good question. Yeah.
So there seems to be a widening gap between education on the high school and middle school level in our country and other countries such as China, Japan, India, and Brazil. So what is Obama planning in terms of reform for child education?
Part of it's No Child Left Behind reform, which has been proposed and still going through cycles. Arnie Duncan actually has won a lot of praise from both parties for what he's been doing with it. So it's stalled a little bit towards the end of the first term. I think it's going to pick up at the beginning of the second term if we've got a president that's going to move it forward. And then there's something else that's a bunch of initiatives going back to sort of grant making or competitive grant making, something called Race to the Top, which is sort of buckets of money and awards that are given to schools that have higher performance. So if they're turning their schools around, and rather than say the federal government's telling you to do this, it puts the impetus on local governments and local officials to actually turn their own schools around and do it in a sustainable way. It's a good question. And all this information's online too if you want to see how the program works. Yeah.
I know Obama has a big bust of Martin Luther King in his office for obvious reasons. But I just think of, when you look at it historically, MLK functioned as this pressure, organized pressure force from the left that pushed Johnson into passing through the Civil Rights Act. It just seems like there's not a sustained liberal Senate group, and it's hard to maintain the Senate with the Democratic president in office. Does he ever wish that there was more of a pressure group on the ground that could push him, that could make the political situation easier for him to push something through? Or does it just always seem like a bug in his hair?
No, I think you're absolutely right. So the question was, and this is something I worked on outreach, so all of my experience was working with the advocacy community. So the question was, putting political pressure either on the president or on other folks to actually get things done, whether, in this case, maybe they're progressive things, maybe in other cases they're a little more conservative. Yeah, that's been one of the big challenges, right? And partially that's creating the politically tenable space for a vote to take place or for something to happen. I talked about No National Tell, but there are plenty of other examples on healthcare reform, on financial aid reform is another good one. So being able to, it used to be that the federal government would lend about $60 billion to big banks. Banks would mark up the money and then loan it to you guys at really high interest rates. The president got rid of the middleman in student lending, so now it's direct lending. So that $60 billion goes to more students at a much lower rate. But I mean, that's something, right, that you would think how do you create that pressure? And it's not necessarily a liberal or conservative thing, or at least it shouldn't be. It turned out to be a bit of one. I don't think there's one entity. I think that's been a challenge, that there are splinter entities that it's also very easy to focus on going against one thing or going for one thing, right? Saying that we're going to elect this person as the president, and then presumably he's going to have a magic wand to do whatever he wants to do. That's not the case. Or we're going to go against this White House because they haven't done X, Y, or Z. Instead of saying, going back to sort of the 60 votes in the Senate, it's sort of a big chessboard or a big political map. Where are the pressure points and how do we need to get it done? I think that has been a source of probably personal frustration of how do you convey what that is when you're not allowed. I mean, you're not allowed to convey that, right? Because you're talking about the different branches of government. But it was definitely a source of frustration for me. And they're also, they're disparate groups. They're groups that are spread out that you sort of want to focus a little bit on one thing or another. Yeah.
2 more questions.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, I already asked a question, but I was wondering, one of the presidential candidates, Obama wants to, what seems like he supports gay marriage. Obama supports gay marriage, and Mitt Romney, does not support gay marriage. But how much can the president actually accomplish towards either, getting gay marriage to be, legalized in all the states and having, gay couples have, full rights, or in the other direction of, completely saying that, no, you can't have gay marriage? Because it seems like sometimes it's on a state-by-state issue. Also, can I please have your autograph while you're in?
I'll trade you for a shift sign-up. Yes, what's your name?
Alexandra.
Alexandra. So,
I love this thing.
thank you. I'll take that back when you're done with it. There's a stack underneath there. So the issue of marriage equality, you're right. What you were getting at was that the White House has relatively limited power in terms of marriage equality itself. Civil marriage isn't, or marriage itself is a religious institution. It's not it's not a federal institution. The one big difference, and it's actually a huge difference, is something called the Defense of Marriage Act. So whereas states have the right, which the president supports, to sort of pass marriage equality or restrict it, obviously his belief is that it should be passed all over the place on a statewide level. This thing called the Defense of Marriage Act, which was passed during the Clinton years, restricts any federal recognition. So meaning, if a state like Iowa says, there's marriage equality, same-gender couples can get married, you still have no federal benefits. So the federal government refuses to recognize your marriage. So it's probably the most egregious case of big government meddling in your house. And that's something that the president has fought to overturn, is going to continue to fight to overturn, particularly coming out in favor of marriage equality. Getting rid of the Defense of Marriage Act is a big priority for a second term. And that's something that Mr. Ryan and Governor Romney vehemently agree with keeping in place. So they want the Defense of Marriage Act to stay there. And the reason that that's irrelevant is you're seeing a lot of these cases on a state-by-state basis, and the federal government is restricting individuals' rights at that point.
But he couldn't actually legalize it in every state just by passing.
No, but so the distinction is no president can legalize it in every state because it's not under federal jurisdiction. The big question is, can the federal government prevent states from recognizing it? Right now they can, and that's wrong. So what the president's promised to do is get rid of the Defense of Marriage Act so that states can decide for themselves whether marriage equality should stand, which is a big contrast from Governor Romney, who says no, the federal government should restrict marriage equality through this thing called the Defense of Marriage Act.
One more question?
Yeah.
I'm Sanjana. I'm a psych and bio major, and I'm wondering if you could tell us your favorite Obama story.
My favorite Obama story? Man, you've heard a few of them today.
The one backstage with your friend.
Oh man.
Yeah.
All right. Now I'm gonna pick another one. I'll tell you that one, but I'll pick another one. You love the self-deprecating humor. So I had a question earlier today about can you tell me a normal story about the president being a normal person? And so I just told this one story. Before I started working at the White House, probably about 3 weeks before I was wrapping things up in California, the president was doing a big event at a high school there, and I ended up volunteering for the event. And I brought a couple of friends with me. My friend Jenna and I were just going backstage after I thought the president had left to say hi to some friends that were traveling. And apparently he was still there, and he saw me. He's like, "Cal, how you doing?" I'm like, "Good, sir. How are you?" When are you coming to DC? I'm like, "Yeah, about 2 or 3 weeks. I'll be there." I said, "By the way, this is my President. This is my friend Jenna." And he goes, "Oh, all right, Jenna. How you doing? Nice to meet you." I didn't know Cal had any friends. Are you kidding me right now? Like, she's obviously going to tell all of our friends. And I just got dissed by the president of the United States. And he knows that she's going to tell all of our friends. And so that's probably one of my favorite stories. But the one that I'll follow up, which is actually probably a good way to close, is that one of the things I worked on when I first started at the White House was something called the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. It was an executive order that was part of, I think, probably 10 or 12 executive orders the president signed. The big belief that he's still sort of pushing for is no American should slip through the cracks, right? So whether you're in a rural community, urban community, any particular ethnic group, Italian Americans, Asian Americans, farmers, whatever it is, there are all these different particular industries or communities that don't have integrated access to federal programs. So some of the federal programs are wasteful and need to be cut. Other federal programs need to do a better job at reaching out to the communities they're supposed to serve. So there was this one program, or one executive order, designed to reach out to the Asian American Pacific Islander community to work on things like language access issues, health issues. There are certain vector-borne diseases or diseases themselves that community is more prone to, which could then be a public health risk for everybody else. So for a bunch of those reasons, I ended up getting tasked with that particular executive order. So on my second day at the White House, I get this stack of papers, and I had worked on this particular issue during the campaign as well. So I knew what all the issues were, but I was told that at 2 o'clock you've got to jump on a conference call to go through this. And of 32 federal agencies that are going to be on the call, the question is whether one of those particular agencies needs to be part of the president's executive order. And I was like, oh, well, does he want it or not? Like, well, we're not going to ask him that question. I mean, that's why he hired all of us. So just get on the call and see what happens with it. I was like, okay, let us know what happens. I said, okay. So I hop on this call. It takes about an hour. They talk about whether it should be part of this executive order or not, this particular federal agency, and we get to the end of the call, and they go, all right, so what's the decision? And I'm just sitting there listening, and I don't say anything, and they go, we said, what's the decision? Nobody says anything. Then someone goes, well, who's on from the White House? And nobody says anything, and then it dawns on me, and I was like, hi, this is Cal. They go, yeah, so what's the decision? And at that moment, I just thought, surely there's an adult in the room who can answer this question, right? But I realized at that moment also that I knew exactly what the choice was. I didn't think the president would have wanted this particular agency to be part of the executive order. I thought it was wasteful. I thought he would have been annoyed at the wastefulness of it. And so I said, no, we don't need it as part of the executive order. And everyone very casually said, okay, great, thanks, talk next week about the rest of the stuff. And they all hung up the phone, and I ran to my boss's office. I was like, yeah, they're calling. I said this agency shouldn't be part of the executive order. She just looks at me and she's like, yeah, I know, that's why we hired you. I was like, no, I know. I was just making sure that, like, I'm going to tell you what I did. So, anyway, the point of all that was that about 6 months later, when this document was actually ready for the president to sign, he brings in community members whenever he signs an executive order into the east wing of the White House, which is right below where he lives, to witness the signing, shake some hands, take some pictures. And I was really nervous because it was my first event for the president. I ended up making my intern come in the day before, which was a Sunday, to like walk through all the space. The rule is you're not supposed to go into that part of the White House on the weekend because it's where the president lives, but I didn't care because I didn't want to screw up the event. So I make my intern come in, we walk through the space. We're walking back to my office down the White House colonnade, which is probably a good 1,200, 2,000 feet of walkway. And there's once you start walking down it, you either turn around or you continue walking. There's no other way to go. We start walking down, and all the way at the end is a guy who looks like the president. And my intern sort of notices and was like, I think it's Barack Obama. We're not supposed to be here. I'm like, no, I know, James. He's like, what are we going to do? I'm like, well, we're not going to turn around and go back into the house. So we keep walking, and the president walks up and he's like, yeah, what are you doing? Of course, I was like, in your house? Sorry. I said, well, sir, I don't know if you remember, tomorrow you're signing this executive order that we talked about months ago. Just did like a real quick 30-second elevator pitch about what it was. No Americans should slip through the cracks, all that. And he looks at me and he looks at James and he goes, yeah, no, I know exactly what that is. I'm glad we're finally doing that. It's the right thing to do. And that floored me because there was nobody else around. There was no press around, there were no journalists, there was no Secret Service, there were no assistants or anybody else. It was just me, my intern, and the president, who was, by the way, walking back home from being in the Oval Office on a Saturday, presumably because he respects the office that he's inherited, and he's wanting to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And that story stayed with me, really fired me up for the next 18 months that I was there. It's one of the big reasons that I decided to come back out on the campaign, because I think that that's a pretty rare thing to have a president that understands that some of the things that he does are not things that you do because they're ever going to win you an election or because they're politically expedient, but because genuinely they are the right thing to do. The end of that story was that James, we walked back to the office and James was like, "Can I call my mom, please? I just met Obama." I let him call his mom. And 3.5 months later was the BP oil spill in the Gulf. And what a lot of folks didn't know was that about a third of all American fishermen in the Gulf region are of Vietnamese descent. And the vast majority of them don't speak English as their first language. So after the oil spill, when BP was going out to these communities and trying to coerce them into signing these very complicated documents that they didn't understand, were it not for a president who pushed this executive order through because he knew it was the right thing to do, were it not for that, these people would not have had any translation services. They wouldn't have anyone from the federal government to go and explain what was happening to them. They just would have been left alone to their own devices when BP was trying to get them to sign these shady documents. Obviously, we didn't go in there and tell them whether they should or shouldn't sign it. We gave them the information to understand what they were being asked to sign. And that was sort of just the bookend of those two kind of crazy bookends to that conversation, that this is a guy who's doing these things because of that reason. You couldn't possibly predict a terrible thing like the BP oil spill, but at the very least, if you're doing the right thing, up until that, you can prevent the fallout of something like that. I thought that was awesome, and that's why I am giving you guys these volunteer sign up forms. So thank you. Thanks. Thank you for having me. Please come and sign up. I know we've got a couple minutes before the